I'm excited that you all have stuck around to talk about my favorite topic ever. I'm actually trying to gain a reputation as the manure poop queen, if you will. Please help spread the word. So because of that little bio, I'm not going to focus about me, but I will say during my time in my master's, I worked in a compost startup lab. So it was very technically focused on testing food waste, and I wanted to get out of there so fast so that I could go back and work with people on farms with manure, help them manage out in the field, and get those nutrients straight back to the soil for your goals. So I'm glad to be back here as a farm planner. Whatcom Conservation District. I'm a farm and dairy planner. I started, as Annika mentioned, in October, but I worked down in Oregon doing the same thing for about a year. And the really cool thing about conservation districts is that we're government, but we're non-regulatory. We're here to help you with your goals. We're not here to tell you what to do or how, but how can we help conserve natural resources to benefit your operation. That looks different at all the different conservation districts. The goals are determined by the area. And so in Whatcom, we've been here since 1946. Some of our main programs include farm planning, which is me, but we also, if you haven't noticed, there's like 5 different booths out in the front room, and those are different core programs, whether it's wildfire resilience, outreach and education, research. We try to improve conservation of natural resources with all these main different programs. Oh, I forgot to mention, farm planning has all our fun rental equipment tools in the building, which include our no-till seed drill, our poultry processing equipment, and our manure spreader. And we're always looking to hear from you what we can add for this rental equipment. So please make sure to tell us what you want. We like to be able to offer it for what you need. So, compost, what is it? I took this bullet point definition here. Organic waste decomposition. Organic not meaning like normal organic produce, but more that it contains carbon. So sometimes there's a confusion about organic materials getting reused for decomposition. They just have carbon in them. It could have pesticides on it, but if it has carbon, it's considered organic. And my favorite part about compost is that the heat you see when you see steam coming out of your manure pile is that's produced by the microbes. That's them producing that heat. So when you think of biology, that heat is not just a chemical reaction, that's a biologically produced reaction in your pile. And it can't really be compost if you haven't actually managed those microbes. So a pile that sits out in the rain over the whole season, it's probably doesn't have any oxygen in it because it's soaking with water. You want something that has the ability to have those microbes that are using oxygen, and that produces the product that we want for our pastures, for our gardens, because it's stable. It means it's finished decomposing. It's free of pathogens. It means it's gotten to that heat temperature so that the pathogens have been deactivated along with plant or weed seeds, and it means it's a beneficial product for you. So in the definition of compost is the fact that you have to be a microbe farmer. So compost versus fresh manure, what are the main benefits of compost? The slow release of nutrients comes from the microbes processing that energy. They store it, and as they break down and other organic matter in the compost breaks down, it acts as that long-term bank account of nutrients. So fresh manure won't have that slow release as compost will, and it'll be a higher carbon, more of a soil amendment product. It's also easier to spread because you might be able to help reduce the moisture. You can also increase the amount of volume reduction happening. So when you compost more rapidly, you're having the volume, you're reducing the volume more rapidly, so you have more space wherever you're trying to store the manure. That's less of a problem if you have a lot of space under a covered area that's easy to work in. But if you want to really get that material smaller, faster, composting will help. And then, like I already mentioned, pathogens and weed seeds, that's an important one, at least for me. Another reason that organic amendments or compost are so beneficial is not only the direct effects on soil health properties, biological, physical, or chemical, that impact crop yield, but also the ability to have both plant health and soil health working indirectly together. So you'll have crop disease suppression because you have a healthier soil because there's more biological activity. They work both on both things separately, directly and indirectly. So as a farm planner, what I do when someone wants to compost and they contact me, well, first I figure out how much waste is on the farm that we can make a resource. So how much manure do you got? Is there any bedding? Do you have food waste? Let's calculate what you're producing, how much is there, and figure out the best method for you to compost it, whether it's a pile, whether it's a windrow, or whether it's like a 3-bay Cadillac system here on the right with aeration in the bottom. That was for a horse rescue that had 7 horses and needed their horse manure to compost as fast as they could. They were producing a lot. So it really, all those things start with knowing how much do you have that you want to compost. There are some assumptions that also need to be taken into account, which include what bedding are you using, how much bedding are you using, what else goes into that manure. We also have different ways to compost that can be smaller or larger, using a concrete system or using a wooden system here. And then I also couldn't leave out worm composting, even though it's not hot composting, but they're really easy to just have in your basement for your coffee grounds. And we also have some in our office. If you want to stop by, we can give you some worms. So, to aerate or not to aerate, that is the question. Sometimes I really like being able to add just a blower and a pipe under the pile, and it will speed up your process. If you look at this table, traditional passive pile that's just static sitting there could take up to a year. If you have aeration, that can reduce that to just 3 months. So when you're trying to decide whether you want to add aeration or not, it really just depends on, well, do you have the space for all the material you're generating? Do you have some really stinky, wet materials that you really need to dry and make aerobic more without having the smells from it being without oxygen? So those are things to think about if you want to make your own kind of pipe on the ground aeration system, or just try something where you turn the pile more frequently, or try to get that moisture off the pile by maybe adding some kind of bulking agent, which could be like something carbon like wood chips or straw that could help make the pile more aerated just naturally without blowing air through the pile. All things to think about depending on your site and what you have. So as I was talking about adding a potential bulking agent or something more carbon and porous, that's what I help people with when deciding a recipe. So depending on the manure you have and what you have in your operation, we can decide and look at what your initial recipe is for the perfect compost recipe. There are actually goal ranges based on your carbon to nitrogen amounts, your moisture content, and then this bulk density free airspace is all just getting at, like if you look at a jar of rice, or if you look at a jar of marbles, how much air space can move through those. So there's actually a bucket method where we can tamp down all the materials that you might have in your compost and calculate whether you're in the right airspace range. That's something for people who really want to improve the aerobic component in their pile. and might be having problems troubleshooting, like why is my pile smelly? Why is my pile why does it have these patches that aren't getting up to temperature? Sometimes I focus on doing an ingredient analysis if we're really trying to troubleshoot and make a quality compost product. So here's just the range of all the different properties in manure. No need to read this whole chart, but I circled horse with bedding, dairy cow separated solids. Those are the two things on here that you could apply fresh, and it might tie up nitrogen. That happens in your compost pile too. That's why we would want to tailor your recipe to help improve that carbon to nitrogen balance, to help it compost properly. So that involves collecting it and covering it. A covered pile prevents nitrogen as nitrate from leaching through. It helps keep in heat and moisture, and then to help improve that carbon to nitrogen ratio, we might need to add either higher nitrogen materials, which could be, there's the typical green food waste, or reduced bedding going into the pile. I know that in that horse composting facility I showed you earlier, they liked to use really fine sawdust so that they could avoid mucking out as much bedding as possible, so that as little carbon was going into their compost. And that really helped them have a better product in the end, and they could get that out to gardeners. They could get rid of that compost more easily. So another benefit of hot composting is that you can, if you want to look at the temperature, you can make sure that you hit that pathogen and weed seed reduction stage. So for pathogens, it's 131 degrees Fahrenheit. For weeds, it's 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So you'll want to check those temperatures and see that you're above them, if possible, so you can tell people the quality of your product. This shows an example from this winter of a windrow with dairy separated solids, leaves, and straw, and it was above that temperature, even in like the recent cold snap. Not this most recent one, but the one before that. So this kind of record keeping can help you give your product to crop growers, because they have to follow the harvest interval window when applying anything that has a biological product of animal origin. So that helps with them knowing they can apply it safely. So the best use for your product depends on your ingredients, depends on the manure you have, and it depends on your goals. If you're looking for a fertilizer, poultry litter is higher end than, say, dairy separated solids or horse manure that has high carbon. You might want to consider those more as soil builders or mulch, depending on what goes into it, and that's where you can plan it out or analyze it. You can send your compost to get a test to help you see whether it's stable and mature, which means, is it done composting? Is it ready to be applied to plants without damaging them? And what's its nutrient value? There's a seal of testing assurance program. You want to make sure your compost is tested like a compost and not as a soil, because they're different things. So this helps guide the right labs that do the proper compost testing. And it's hard to read this, but if you get a compost test, please call me. I'd love to help you read it. It's very fun. Okay. So the main takeaways: composting means management. You need to cover the pile, especially during our winter rains. That improves product quality. In the summer, it can even help retain moisture. And then it gives you the better ability to retain heat and get up to temperature. And then make sure that you're, if possible, managing for the oxygen that your microbes need. That's the best way to feed your microbe herd. I don't have animals, but I love manure, so I need people to call me who have manure so we can manage the microbes. And then here's my contact, but we also have a sign up outside. So I have my card, but here's a QR code. You can also sign up for a compost site visit or fill out at our booth. And then here's a summary of all our different programs that we have at Farm Planning Services. Thank you for listening to me talk today. I really appreciate it. So.
And one other, so I was just going to point out that equipment share little circle up on top is that we have for rent now a poultry processing unit, a ground-driven manure spreader, and we just got a no-till seed drill. So those 3 components are now products that the Whatcom Conservation District can loan out to you all to help in all this process. We also offer free soil testing for anybody who is raising livestock, either on pasture or you're applying manure to your fields. It's another advantage. And then the free tarps for manure piles. If you're raising animals, you want to keep the value, keep that microbe herd strong, cover it with a tarp. So those are some of the pieces that Whatcom Conservation District can really help you out with. Now I want to open it up to the crowd if you have any questions for Anna about farming microbes.
So I think I heard you say that you could just put a pipe under your, or do you actually have to blow air into it? Will it just pipe up as well?
So it depends how much aeration you want to get, but I would, if you have electricity, you can get a small blower and set it on a timer. The best way to without electricity and the added aeration is to put like a layer of wood chips along the base to help create a chimney effect of air moving through the pile with the heat. I think if you wanted to add aeration and you were gonna go through the trouble of putting a pipe on the bottom, you might as well hook it up to a blower, depending on if you really want to speed up to the month active range I was talking about. In that kind of situation, the pipe actually gets covered with wood chips, and the air blows down through holes in the pipe. So I could go back to the diagram. So that if you can see, that way the pipe holes don't get clogged, but then the wood chips help that air move through the pile in an even distribution. It can be really simple if you do want to try it out. You can also put a tub over your blower. I have found one for $10 at Goodwill, which was really fun. I bought it, of course. I gave it away as a gift. But so you could try that out. You could try just wood chips and some people stick pipes in on the side to get air just to move more easily. But I think that for the most aeration impact, you would want to force air through the pile. You could do easiest to most effort and see what got you the benefit you wanted.
So how often do you have to actually turn the manure pile? Like if you have a tractor?
Yeah. It's so when you talk about temperature record keeping for like getting pathogen reduction, they actually want you to turn the windrow, or if it's a windrow or a pile, at least 5 times in a 15-day window at that temperature. That's for the meeting the requirements. So turning more regularly at the beginning stages of composting, like let's say like every week or so, is a good, every week for like the first month, depending on the process, is a good baseline, but then you can turn it less as it starts to get lower temperature, which is why I usually really like people to monitor the temperature, because usually you don't really know what's going on or where you are in the composting process. But like the typical ranges here, if you have an aerated pile, that's a good benefit, is that you don't really need to turn it as much. So it depends if you're doing a windrow or a pile with aeration. I generally, like if you look, the turning frequency for something static is like you just do it once or twice over the whole time. But if you wanted to speed up the process of composting, you could turn more frequently, like at least every week for the start, for the first month, and then maybe once every 2 weeks. And kind of monitoring the temperature can help you decide that better, but that's a good general guideline. I hope that made sense. Yeah.
So if you have a two-bin system and you have multiple horses and you're adding to that on a daily or a weekly basis,
Yeah.
do you wait until the pile is ready to move to the second bin before you start turning, or do you turn and add and turn and add and add?
I like to usually like get that bin topped off like as high as it can go, and then turn it, and then move to the next bin to start adding. So you kind of have one bin that you're saying like, we've filled this to the top, this is my batch, and then no more adding to this pile, like close it off with a rope, and then move to the next one to start filling that, and then just turn it in that bay and keep track of that through its life cycle. And then you know, like, okay, this one has started composting how many days, and you can track it. So I like to do it kind of, each bay is its own batch. Yeah.
Great question, thank you. What kind of wood chips would you want to use? Is there certain ones you want to avoid?
It would depend if, so for the bottom over the aeration pipe, is that what you mean?
Or just adding it to the pile for aeration?
Okay.
Without the pile?
Yeah. At the base of the pile, you might want to add the wood chips. If possible, what would be nice is to have it, if you had it in an enclosed bay, and we have, I wonder if I have a good photo. So see in this EcoBlock bay, there's actually these two like parking stop curbs. If you put the wood chips below that, then when you go to get your compost out, you're not taking all those wood chips out with it, because you might not want the wood chips in your finished product. So that's the balance if you are using something to help with the air through the pile, versus if you want it in your finished product or not. But with wood chips that are for aeration, you want some that are kind of like hog fuel, like pretty bulky and big. But it's just making sure you don't get it into your product if you don't want that extra carbon in there. And so for bedding, having the fine particle, the fine sawdust was the better way to reduce getting it into the actual compost. So, yeah, I hope that helps.
Great question. Something else? Yes.
So I don't have large animals, and I'm often looking for sources of manure, and I can identify some, but I've always been a little bit nervous about what might be in that manure. What are some of the questions to ask and things to look out for?
Yeah, I think that I like composting manure I don't know about. I would ask people what they apply if, on their land. There have been some concerns in the past, I know in Whatcom, with specific herbicides that damage broadleaf crops. I think just asking about those. You can also do your own grow out bioassay to see if there's damage before you apply it to your crops. So you can do a little tray of cucumbers or peas, so that you can have that peace of mind just to make sure. And then I think that'd be my main question. And then depending on what you're using it for, the whole range of, well, is it the nutrients you want? Is it what you want to use it for? Yeah.